for this to be happening from this podium here certainly is something a little bit different, especially at this time of day.
And give us a sense of what we've heard today in terms of the battle and the sense you're getting from the military about the direction.
I'm sorry, Lester. I just received, I think, a 3-minute warning, so I missed your question.
3-minute warning. Okay, well, then why don't you and I will just converse here a bit because we don't want to miss this. My question has been with regard to the information that has come out in the daily briefings. Have you detected a significant change at the way military officials view the direction of the war from the military standpoint?
Well, we saw a lot of frustration on both parts, really. There was a certain frustration at the very outset, and perhaps it still lingers a bit among the media here. You've certainly been in this business a while, so you know what it could be like to get a couple hundred journalists together who don't feel as if they're getting enough information. It can get a little bit sticky at times, but that seems to have gone down just a bit. We seem to be receiving a little bit more information from the podium. It seems as if sometimes they're efforting lately. They're trying to get us more information. At least that's my own personal sense that I'm getting in dealing with the military here, that they really are doing their best to try to get us the latest information as quickly as they can. They feel a very big responsibility, I think, here to do that, to stay out in front of these things.
And I'm wondering how mindful they are of the fact that there is, in fact, a PR war here. We know a lot of these briefings, they talk about the accusations that are flying back on both sides with regard to civilians.
Well, indeed, they are conscious of it. I think when we listened to the Secretary of Defense today, when he made his statement, he said, I know that this is being broadcast in Iraq, and I want the Iraqi people to hear my words. They're broadcasting on radio in 5 frequencies that covers the entire country of Iraq. We know that they're broadcasting television signals now, not the entire country, but it is reaching closer to Baghdad, we're told. And of course, you mentioned the information war. They have been leafleting right along, changing the message depending on where they are in the operation. So yes, indeed, they know that their words from this podium will be heard in Iraq.
And again, separately from whatever may be announced here, have you received any other information regarding this battle apparently underway in Karbala?
Really, I think only what you've reported. In running in here, I missed your report, but just to tell you what we've heard on this end from military officials, that there is a major battle going on in the vicinity of Karbala, and that it is ground forces, coalition ground forces, of course, engaging with the Republican Guard. We're told that it was huge, was a word that was used, and that it was escalating. Of course, there's been a lot of talk about these engagements with the Republican Guards, both on the ground and in the air. And as the Secretary of Defense was saying today, now that Baghdad seems to be circled on 3 sides by coalition forces, we know that this was something that was going to continue to happen more frequently. And we're also told that I think 50% was one number I heard today, although that didn't come out of CENTCOM, that the Republican Guard forces had been depleted and degraded around Baghdad significantly, at least is what they're saying here. They really didn't put a percentage on it at Central Command, but they did say it was significant.
And Rob, I'll ask you to stand by again. We're waiting for a statement from Central Command in just a few moments. Right now, let's go to the Pentagon. Jeannie Ohm is there and has been following as many of these developments as well. Jeannie, in the briefing today, did you get a sense that we were nearing any turning point or that there was something significant brewing tonight?
It was sort of mixed messages, Lester. On the one hand, the Pentagon was saying the key to success is patience, but at the same time, they made a point of emphasizing the tremendous progress being made on the ground. And, you know, we've been talking about the Republican Guard units now around Karbala. Well, they made a point of signaling not just the Medina, but there's been attacks on the Hammurabi, the Baghdad, and Al-Nida. These are just 4 of those Republican Guard units, and officials saying that they have been striking ground and air capabilities of these Republican Guard units, degrading them. Of course, the goal, they've made it very clear, is that they want to sufficiently degrade those divisions before sending in ground forces. So again, as you have been talking about, we don't know exactly what will come out of this briefing coming up any minute now, but we should mention the big development is the fact that officials are confirming a major ground battle, which they're describing as huge, is underway right now with ground troops as well as Republican Guard units near Karbala.
Are they talking at all about what American units may be involved?
It's not clear, but we have known up until this point that the 3rd Infantry Division was around the Karbala area, so that is just an assumption right now that they may be the ones involved.
And Jeannie, I know, and we talked a moment ago, there were a lot of questions, of course, about there's many headlines in the paper about commanders, unnamed commanders, unhappy with the war plan, some officers, retired officers on television. Was there an acknowledgement that this plan has been adjusted somewhat?
Oh, absolutely. They say the initial plan, was coming off of a shelf. That one clearly had to be scrapped because it was just old and not facing the realities of the 21st century. And they do say there was a lot of revisions going on. And in fact, they say that adjustments are being made as we speak. But you mentioned before about the ground war, and they were talking about how the strikes and the air campaign, that they really seriously pounded them for the last 4 to 5 days. In fact, just within the last 24 hours, there were 800 strike flights, as well as about 50 targets alone in Baghdad that were signaled out, all to go after the regime's command and control and communication abilities.
And talk about the significance, if you can. Some of the ships that have been firing cruise missiles in the Red Sea apparently moved out of the Red Sea. What's the story there, and what does that mean in terms of the war effort?
Lester, that was one of the new developments today. If you recall, both Turkey and Saudi Arabia told the U.S. military to stop firing Tomahawk cruise missiles. Why? Because there were at least 7 misfires, 5 landed in Saudi Arabia, 2 in Turkey. There were no serious incidents involved with them, no casualties, but there was serious concern by those 2 governments. They didn't want to see any more of these incidents, so they asked the U.S. military to stop firing those Tomahawk cruise missiles. And as a result, 8 Navy warships are moving from the Red Sea. It will take at least a couple of days' journey to go all the way around to the Persian Gulf. That is the only spot right now that the U.S. Navy can launch those precision-guided missiles.
Jeannie, okay, I'll ask you to stand by as well. We're at the quarter hour. A lot of people know that we do the headlines every 15 minutes here. The big headline may be about to take place. We're not sure. Statement about to come out of Central Command headquarters in Doha. We don't know what it is. We can tell you that U.S. warplanes pounded targets outside the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk today. Local Kurdish fighters are calling it the heaviest attack on the strategic oil hub since the start of the war. The White House says there's no plan to ask for more money for the war in Iraq, but they won't rule out the possibility. The president has already asked Congress for $75 billion to pay for the war. The director of management and budget says the president reserves the right to ask for more. And the latest casualty numbers in the Pentagon show no change. 46 Americans have been killed in and around Iraq, 38 from hostile fire, 16 are missing in action, 7 are prisoners of war, and just over 100 have been wounded. If you're just tuning in, we've been waiting for the last several minutes for a briefing, or actually a statement, we're told, will be read by General Brooks at the Central Command headquarters in Doha, Qatar. It is very unusual that he would make a statement on camera at the wee hours of the morning in Doha. We will carry it as soon as he takes to the podium. Right now, we want to get over to the White House right now. The Bush administration today defending the Pentagon's war plan, dismissing the claims of critics that not enough troops are engaged in the action. NBC's Bob Kerr is at the White House now with more. Bob?
Lester, good day. They're still somewhat defensive here about what they call the second guessing about all this. Ari Fleischer today stating again that the president has faith in this plan, that he in fact set the plan and believes it's working.
From all the conversations the president has had with the planners, this is the plan that was agreed upon, was discussed robustly. Everybody understood what it called for and was checked off on.
Actually, Ari Fleischer then reminded the press corps here at the White House of something he told us a couple of weeks ago, and that was on the day that the president actually ordered the war. He participated in a teleconference, not only with General Tommy Franks, but with all of the top military commanders in the field, in the war zone, and asked them 2 questions. He asked them, were they comfortable with the war plan, to which we're told they all said yes. Also, did they have what they think they needed to get the war going? And again, we were told that they all said yes. I think what happened then, Lester, is that there came an underestimation of the strength, the tenacity of the Iraqi military forces to put up the resistance they did and fight with guerrilla tactics. So what happened here and what we're being told is that there is a plan. It's somewhat flexible. It had a so-called rolling start that is now dealing with something that was not necessarily anticipated. So that's the explanation we're getting here. There was also a big boost here today for Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. He was here earlier today to meet with the president, a senior administration official telling us just around the time of that meeting that the president has tremendous faith in the Secretary of Defense and in his ideas. Also, another issue today, Saddam Hussein, where is he? How is he? How might he be? Well, Ari Fleischer, the White House spokesman, said it was more than interesting today that Saddam Hussein did not show up on TV as promised.
Particularly today, after they advertised, Al Jazeera did report it, that Saddam Hussein would himself address the Iraqi people, and he failed to show up. It does raise interesting questions, but the bottom line is we don't know. We don't know, and therefore we're going to be guarded in what we say because we don't know. He could show up, but he hasn't yet.
A continuing mystery here as the White House and the Pentagon more or less dare Saddam Hussein to come out and show that he's alive some way on TV. Now, Lester, I want to tell you that we didn't see the president today. Don't know that we're going to see him tomorrow, but on Thursday he is going to travel to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. He's going to visit with Marines down there. Camp Lejeune figures in this mightily, as you probably know. 12 of the soldiers who've been killed so far came from Camp Lejeune, 7 of them missing from there as well. Lester.
Bob Kerr at the White House. Bob, thanks very much. We have been standing by now for the better part of 25 minutes. We were given guidance in the military. There would be a statement read by General Vincent Brooks at the podium at Doha, Qatar, the Central Command Media Center, and we are still standing by for it. No indication that it won't happen. We're told it will be brief and a statement, and we don't know what it will be about. The announcement that there would be a statement coincided with some other dramatic news that we're told is not related, and that is that there is apparently a very fierce, large, and escalating battle going on near Karbala, south of Baghdad. Let's talk about that for a moment with our MSNBC analyst, Colonel Jack Jacobs, who joins us in the war room. Talk about the significance of that, and is it something that you would expect at some point, a major battle in that location?
No, I would have expected these guys to fall back, not to engage in a large-scale attack on our position, because they're at a tremendous disadvantage. We can see them day or night, and when they come out in the open, we drop bombs on them and shoot them and so on. It makes their lives extremely difficult.
But could this be a U.S. offensive, though, against the dug-in Republican Guard positions?
There are two possibilities. One is that it's a U.S. offensive to open up the flank of the Republican Guard position. If you see where Karbala is, you can see that it's on the extreme left flank of what is the Republican Guard position of 3 divisions. If you open up that flank, then it makes it lots easier to attack that flank from another force that would come in, American force that would come in from the west. But there's another possibility. John Warden and I were discussing this at the break, and that is that the Republican Guard units have been pummeled so relentlessly that this may be an attempt by these units to break out. They've got no place to go. They can sit there and continue to take hits from the air. They can't go into Baghdad. Republican Guard units are not permitted in Baghdad. Only special Republican Guard units are. And the only thing, therefore, that they have at their disposal is to try to break out of what is rapidly becoming an encirclement.
You know, Colonel, the Defense Secretary Rumsfeld today suggested that U.S. forces have Baghdad surrounded from the north, the west, and the south. The fact that he mentioned the north, we know there are troops in the north, but the thought has not been that they're anywhere near Baghdad. What do you suppose he meant by that?
Well, that's fascinating. I would have thought that he was talking about the forces we have in the north, like the 173rd.
And maybe he was.
And perhaps he was, but we do know something else. He's a big proponent of special operations forces, and we have a substantial number of special operations forces engaging in a wide variety of missions inside Iraq. As a matter of fact, a lot of the battlefield successes we've had up until now, indeed a lot of the success we've had in bombing enemy units, both in the north and in the south, is as a result of operations from special operations forces. So he may be talking about that. But perhaps, only perhaps, he may be talking about yet another force, a conventional force, which we have managed to insert into Iraq in the north. Now, don't forget, the 173rd Airborne Brigade jumped into the north, secured an airfield, and we have been air landing lots of equipment in particular, but also perhaps men in that region. And it may very well be that that's what he's talking about as well.
And, you know, I've mentioned it before, and I have no military experience, but historically, we all remember the famous left hook of General Schwarzkopf that caught everyone off guard. And I've wondered, as we've watched this, if there's something that all of us don't see that may be materializing in the near future.
Well, something that makes a great deal of sense from the conduct of the ground war is to do the following, and you sort of suggested it already. We have the 3rd Infantry Division arrayed on the west. We have the Marines on the east. And somebody else, it would make a great deal of sense to insert in the west off to the side so that we can flank the Republican Guard divisions or approach Baghdad from the west, across the river from the west. And in addition to that, if we were to have a force, and it didn't necessarily have to be a very large force because the enemy is oriented towards the south, but to have another force, a brigade or regiment size or maybe slightly larger, attacking Baghdad from the north to catch them when they're facing towards the south would probably be a huge effect on our side.
And Jack, just want to pause, have you stand by for a second as folks are tuning in. We're getting near the bottom of the hour. Couple of things happening here. Jack and I specifically talking about what was reported as a large battle near Karbala that is escalating, a large battle. And then separately, we received word about 35, 40 minutes ago there would be a statement in the next 10 or 15 minutes from General Brooks at Central Command headquarters. That caught all our attention because they simply don't make on-camera statements in the middle of the night. Keep in mind it's around 3 in the morning there. So we're waiting for that. It's been suggested to us that will not be about what's happening at Karbala. We simply don't know what that will be about. Colonel Jack Jacobs is with me, as well as Jeannie Ohm at the Pentagon. Jeannie, have you heard anything more from there about what we might get from General Brooks?
Not at this point, Lester. And as you pointed out, these two incidents, the fact that we got word that there was this major battle at Karbala and the fact that CENTCOM was about to release a statement may not be related, in fact, at all. So, again, we are just standing by as well. But you pointed out something earlier about all the criticism that's been going on, all the highly critical reports out there about the war plan. It was interesting to note it wasn't just coming from inside the Beltway, so to speak, or retired military officials. In fact, when General Myers was asked, this was actually coming from commanders in the field, his response was quite interesting, saying, none of those perceptions are probably wrong, but what he did add was that they're probably not getting the big picture, so they're only seeing a snapshot of what they're seeing, and that's why they were basing their reasons for not having enough ground troops based on just what they were seeing.
And I'm just seeing more reports about Karbala. That's 68 miles southwest of Baghdad. Has the sense been that a lot of these forces that appear to have been pausing, and I know that's a loaded word in this, but those armored forces have been on the move in recent days? Jenny?
Lester, actually, it was a couple of days ago when we first got word that there were so-called probing attacks taking place in that very area in which, the troops would send out some forces there to kind of gauge a sense of the enemy's defenses and their strengths and their size. So we actually heard about that a few days ago, and it's only been in the last 48 hours perhaps that we've been hearing more about these engagements, and now the Pentagon was earlier characterizing them as serious ground operations currently underway involving all components. So it wasn't just air attacks, it wasn't just armed reconnaissance, but it was a full ground operation underway, and now we're getting confirmation from that from defense officials talking about this huge and escalating battle there.
And Jack, what is a probing attack?
Well, they're just trying to find the location of our lines, where our forward elements are and where our flank elements are, so they can find seams in our defense that would permit them perhaps to conduct a spoiling attack, perhaps to conduct a breakout, perhaps to find out where our major weapon systems are so they can call in artillery or rockets or something like that to destroy them.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to, apropos of nothing whatsoever, I was going to hazard a guess about this statement that was going to be read. If it has nothing to do with Karbala, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it's got to be something relatively momentous, but if it doesn't have anything about Karbala, perhaps they're going to announce, and I may be completely wrong, that we've captured somebody of significance.
Well, you can shake the box up in the days leading to Christmas, and you're sometimes wrong, so we'll all find out. what this statement will be. And again, the guidance in these things, as they do slip, is about maybe 40 minutes ago now. We got the initial word that in about 15 minutes we'd hear something, and then after that we were told another 15 minutes. That's the way these things work. We're in position right now at the Central Command Forward Headquarters in Doha, Qatar, and we're told whatever this statement will come from Brigadier General Vince Brooks. He's the general who has conducted most of the briefings that we've seen in the morning, our time here, in the evening in Doha, and has kind of given us the play-by-play as to what's happened during the previous 24 hours. But we're told he will speak, that it will be a short statement, and we continue to watch and to find out. And what we have been led to believe, though, is it is in fact separate for whatever is going on in Karbala. And so since that's the only thing that we know of that's happening specifically, let's continue that conversation. And Jack, you mentioned flank, that the U.S. could be attaching the flank. You know, we hear these terms division and battalion and Republican Guard, this and that. I mean, roughly how many forces, how many units are we talking about when we're talking about the Medina division of the Republican Guard?
Well, let's start with a base case. Our divisions have somewhere between, let's say, 15 and 20,000 people in them, including the support that usually comes with them. A fairly substantial organization, and it's commanded by a major general. He's assisted by 2 brigadier generals, and each of the major units under him, each is commanded by a colonel, a full colonel. A brigade, for example, in the American Army has about, fully loaded up, maybe as many as 4,000 troops in it. But the Iraqi units are substantially smaller. Some are as small as half as large as an American unit of comparable size. So an Iraqi division, even a tank division, may have only about 8,000, 7,000 soldiers in them. Fewer tanks, fewer armored personnel carriers, and far less support. But we already know that because of the pounding these guys have taken south of Baghdad the last week or so, that some of these units have been reduced to perhaps half the size that they were before. So some of these units we're talking about, therefore, are maybe somewhere, a whole division, maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 or fewer troops. That's not very big for a division, maybe as few as 3,000.
And Jack, we've talked about command and control, which was such an important target in the opening days of the war. Do Iraqi ground forces in general, are they more tied to the mothership, if you will? In other words, are they not able to work on their own, and are U.S. forces conversely trained to operate if they have to on their own?
Well, it's a little bit of both. We have very resourceful soldiers, and their soldiers are less resourceful. They're less well-trained. Even the Special Republican Guards are less well-trained than our frontline units. But command and control is very, very important and interesting in this regard. The command and control that's been exercised in the southern area has been very, very spotty. So these divisions have been operating more or less on their own. But just because they're required to operate on their own doesn't mean they're any good at it. And as a matter of fact, we've seen them not be very good at it. They've been doing things like making frontal assaults against our positions, using small arms and automatic weapons when we have command of the skies. They've been doing things like digging their tanks in to prevent us from hitting them with ground-based anti-tank weapons, leaving them completely exposed to air and not permitting them to get out. They're not able to organize any kind of large-scale combined arms effort. This means that if they can't do that, there may be a motivation on the part of some of the subordinate units below the division, brigades, battalions even, maybe individual companies of 100 or fewer soldiers, to just give up. Because if they sit there, they're just going to get pounded, and there's no way that they're going to get out of there. So they may want to try to give up, particularly on this western flank.
But they have had months, certainly, to prepare, as the U.S. has, for the Battle of Baghdad. You've got to think there is an integrated defense plan. And knowing that the U.S. would be going after command and control, would it be a stretch to assume that the game plan is already laid out for them individually?
No, not a stretch at all, and it's a very good point. They've had 12 years to rehearse this. They've had a long, long time to develop their primary positions and their secondary and alternate positions to which they can go if they have to fall back. By the way, they've been fighting something of a classic delaying action up until this point in any case. So one could assume that that's exactly how they're going to fight the rest of this, and they do have defensive positions in depth. They also have something that we don't have, and it's the one thing that may be forcing them to stay exactly where they are and not to give up, and that is that the following. They've got political commissars, each one of whom has got a gun aimed at individual soldiers, and they are preventing these guys from leaving. The only way that they're going to get out of there is to band together, perhaps knock off the commissar, or convince the commissar that discretion is the better part of valor, and either give up or, what we may be seeing here, try to break out of what is rapidly becoming a very deadly encirclement.
And I got more questions for you, but let me just pause right here. I know folks are flipping back and forth, trying to follow the war, watch the war, if you will. Here's what we're waiting for right now, and we have been waiting for a while, but we're told there will be a brief statement that will be read by the general who's been General Vincent Brooks, who's made the briefings every day. It is highly unusual that he or anyone would come before the camera in the wee hours of the morning there in Doha, Qatar. So we were given some guidance that it'd be 10 or 15 minutes. It's been considerably longer than that, but we suspect it will be an announcement of some significance, or one they believe will be of significance. We'll carry it for you when it starts there at the CENTCOM briefing room. We're also, at the same time, we've had reports of a major battle near Karbala. It's about 68 miles southwest of Baghdad. You see it on the map there. The reports we had, big battle, one that is escalating. And Colonel Jacobs, I just want to read the Reuters account. This is described by someone at Central Command who said, "This is the big battle," and asked if the fighting represented a much anticipated new push toward the Iraqi capital. The official said, quote, "It well could be." So certainly no confirmation that we're looking at the final assault on Baghdad. But just from how you've seen the pieces come together over the last week and a half, have you viewed the attack on Baghdad as one big push, or might it be a push here, a push there, and something that would play out over a series of days rather than one giant assault?
Well, in any case, it's going to be in a series of days because it's not an objective that can be taken very, very easily without going through the entire city bit by bit in a very routinized fashion to make sure that our flanks and rear are not exposed, that we don't miss any blocks where soldiers are hiding out as civilians and so on. The kind of activity that we're seeing down in Basra, where the British forces are located, the painstaking going through each individual residence to make sure that there are no bad guys there. That's the kind of stuff we're probably going to see inside Baghdad. So once we get into the city, it's going to take some time. However, fighting on the outskirts like this is going to require a big push of some kind, because what we want to do is eliminate the majority of the conventional resistance in the approaches to Baghdad. What you don't want to do is go into Baghdad and discover that you got a bunch of bad guys in the back, and you're going to have to fight them as well.
And I know I think you're sitting over that map of Baghdad right now. Maybe you could just give us a sense. What would the military objectives be? We keep hearing taking Basra and taking Nasiriyah and taking Baghdad. Obviously, you're not going to control every block in a city of 5 million. What are the key things that a military force has to do in the immediate hours in the inner city?
Well, the first things, the most important things are the avenues of approach from outside the city into the city, and you can see them depicted here. There are approaches from every direction. Now, we are attacking from the south to the north, so you can expect that that at least one of our units, maybe the Marines, have a mission to attack into Baghdad along an axis that's parallel to or astride Route 8. The 3rd Infantry Division is coming up on the western side, so you can expect that there would be a broad axis of advance into the city from that direction. If I were running it, I would also have forces off to the west.
Hey, Jack, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. I understand we've got David Schuster, one of our other correspondents at the Central Command briefing room. What are you hearing there, David?
Well, Lester, this was actually an announcement that we were told would be made about a half an hour ago, and they were, of course, made aware of some of the timing and all of this. I can tell you, Lester, that there was the White House representative to Central Command was in on a meeting with sort of the person who was essentially the main media relations director here at Central Command. So clearly this is a decision that at least the timing is being coordinated by the White House. And they're, of course, well aware that the evening newscasts are already on, and they certainly had an opportunity to make this 30-second announcement as it was described. They certainly had an opportunity to make it in the last half hour, so we're not exactly sure what the delay is. But in any case, the guidance we've been given is that this is not related to the huge battle that's been described at the Pentagon as far as the battle between coalition ground troops and Republican Guard forces. We've also been told that this will definitely not be General Franks making this 30-second statement, that there will not be questions. But again, the guidance we're getting is that this is related to something that has not been reported yet. So, of course, it has all of us sort of scratching our heads wondering, well, what could it be, and lots of speculation among the few reporters that are here, and also more speculation because this was supposed to happen a while ago. But in any case, we're just sitting tight and waiting.
And David, I don't know the layout there, but can you, and it's obviously running a war is a 24-hour operation, but is there a level of activity at any given time that you can see that would suggest that something unusual is happening?
Absolutely, Lester. There are a number of people that were here late tonight that are normally gone. I mean, the place is staffed 24 hours around the clock. I mean, there are public information officers whose job it is essentially to try to keep us up to date even through the night here when our embedded reporters are providing certain things on the battlefield, or when operations are over. There are people here overnight to give us information and to tell us a little bit about what's going on. But usually these are sort of staffers that the regular staff that work overnight. Tonight we've seen the sort of people here at Central Command, at least in the media office, who are usually only here just before the briefings or when General Franks is around. So there was a lot of indication earlier tonight that something was brewing. We had been given some guidance, which I suppose I can report now since the statement is going to be made. We had been given guidance earlier that there were some pretty good developments tonight that they were going to be talking about. And then it was shortly after that when they said, okay, there's going to be an on-camera briefing, well, not really a briefing, just a statement with no questions. So clearly there are a lot of people here. The person in charge of Central Command's media office dealing with the press has been here all day long. The sort of people that you don't see unless there's something fairly significant going on. But again, it's sort of impossible to tell in sort of the big picture. One of the things that I think one of the criticisms of Central Command here is that they sometimes have perhaps a tin ear politically as far as how some of this plays, not necessarily in the United States, but perhaps in much of the Arab world or in Europe. So it's impossible to know how significant this is, or what they're going to really say, or whether this is a huge development, as some people have suggested.
And as you suggest to us, this is not going to be related to what's happening at Karbala. That in itself sounds like a fairly major development. Was there any hint in today's briefing, any suggestion that there might be heavy fighting in that area?
Well, there was, Lester, in part because they've been pretty open the last couple of days about talking about the Marine units and also the Third ID that are essentially taking parallel tracks up towards Baghdad. And even though they talk a lot about not wanting to give away details of operational security, over the last 2 days or so, they've been fairly open about describing that there are these sort of two big sort of mass groups of soldiers that are moving forward, and lots of hints to us that at some point whoever was sort of caught in between was essentially going to be toast, and that there was going to be an effort made to essentially cut off Baghdad from Republican Guard so that the Republican Guard could not retreat back. But again, who knows what it is that they're going to announce, but clearly they feel that something has been building the last couple of days, and whether this is just operational as far as the battle, or whether there's something else perhaps related to weapons of mass destruction, or related to something related to Saddam Hussein, who knows.
And traditionally, so for comparison, for those of us who clearly aren't in the briefing room, how do you normally get your information there in the middle of the night that you pass along to us?
Well, a couple of ways. There are probably 5 or 6 different people who staff this part of Central Command through the night. And so even though a lot of news organizations pull out because it is now 2:45 in the morning here, there are a couple of us that are here through the night. And because a lot of the ground operations and some of the key battles and airstrikes are happening at nighttime because of the nighttime advantage the coalition forces have, usually about once every half an hour, sometimes more, sometimes less, we're able to go and talk sort of on an off-the-record basis or a guidance basis with the people who are back here who are in touch with sort of I don't want to describe it as the war room, but maybe that's the best description of sort of the command center here at Central Command. And the media office is constantly, from what we're told, in touch with the senior commanders to talk about what can they release, what has happened that is available to us. And so usually, a couple times an hour, we'll sit down either in our office or back in the office where these sort of media relations types have their office and talk about what's going on, when can we report it, what sort of things should we be looking for, and then it's an opportunity for us to sort of extrapolate from that. Well, given that you're using X number of aircraft, or given that this development you're announcing publicly now, can we read into this particular strategy or that? And sometimes they'll talk us away from things. Sometimes they'll say, well, Schuster, you're a pretty good reporter, and that's sometimes the wink and the nod that maybe we're onto something. But a lot of it, Lester, to be honest, is sometimes they're reading the tea leaves. Very rarely will they come out and say, here's what's happened and here's the battle that's going on right now. It's usually once the battle is over, and sometimes it's once something has been reported from one of the embedded reporters that may provide, say, just a snapshot of what's going on, and maybe there's a larger picture that they want to describe to us. And then on those occasions, there's certainly been times in the last couple of nights especially where they will actually have a colonel walk into our office and say, here's something that I think the news organizations are going to be interested in, and sometimes, the way it works around here is the news organizations that are here get it, and occasionally have a little bit of a lead time on others, and those who don't, well, they have to wait to read it on the wire.
Well, and this has all been very incremental. It was about an hour ago we first got word that General Vince Brooks would read this statement, and we understand that it was initially embargoed. In other words, we weren't even supposed to announce that, and now, and I think you just hinted to it, David, we're being told that we can report that what we will hear is good news about an operational mission that's coming from U.S. officials. Have you heard any more than that, that it's just going to be good news?
Well, no, and again, the thing that just has all of us so intrigued is about 20 minutes ago I went through to the colonel in charge of Captain Frank Thorpe, who's in charge of the press operation, a part of Central Command, and I said, look, here's everything that we are reporting right now. I just want to know, is any of this related to what's going on? And he said, well, obviously I can't talk about operational details, but he said, based on everything that's out there, I think that what we're going to tell you will be something that nobody has reported yet. So, read into that what you will. I mean, at least we're getting every indication from them that this is something totally different than the massive battle that's underway between Republican Guard troops and coalition forces. The British, interestingly enough, say they have no idea what this announcement is related to. They have not been told, at least here at Central Command. Their media liaison officers have no idea what's going on. They say their commanders have no idea.
David, we're looking at a picture of the briefing room, and I see three guys sitting there in camouflage. I assume they're members of the service. Are there folks in the military who get their first information, the big picture, in that briefing?
As far as, what do you mean by folks, Lester? You mean the other officials here?
Do you see military people who come in and hear this for themselves as well?
Well, yeah, I think the people you're seeing, actually, there are a certain number of technical types whose job it is to make sure that everything's plugged in the briefing room and the sound works and whatnot. I think those are the people, though I can't see it right now. I think those are who you're talking about. But in any case, yeah, okay, I see. Actually, those three people that you see in our shot, those are actually, well, this is interesting. Those are the three members of the British press office who are here at Central Command right now, who have gone into the briefing room, obviously, because, we're here around the clock, and especially overnight, there are not too many of us. They have become quite friendly with some of us in the press, and I'm not sure, I couldn't hear that. I don't know if that was a 2-minute warning or not, but in any case, those three members of the British press office here wandered into the briefing because they heard all the chatter from the reporters, and they decided that they would walk in the briefing too, so they could hear what the Americans were going to announce. But again, they say they have no idea what it is that is going to be announced tonight, and they say they've called their commanders, and they have no idea. So I think because this is the most action at 3 in the morning that at least the British press office has seen here at Central Command in some time, I figured they decided they would come to the briefing and watch it themselves.
And I find it interesting that whatever it is they're about to share with us is something that hasn't been reported. And it reminds me, David, and my staff knows I was on my soapbox last night expressing the frustration that I expect some viewers have. It's very hard to figure out, to get a real sense of how the war is going. Do you get the sense that even from your vantage point, you're only looking at it through a soda straw?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and one of the longest conversations I think that we've had on a off the record basis, at least in the last couple of days, was a conversation about what sort of information is the press aware of, and what sort of information is the press and the public not aware of. And of course, they wouldn't go into details to say what we don't know, but there was every indication that there is a lot out there that they claim that the press and the American public have no idea about, and they believe. And this is their belief. They believe it's the kind of thing that would start to make sense a couple weeks from now and that people would be very pleased about. But again, it's hard to know whether that's just sort of them spinning us and trying to convince us that they're really running the war according to plan and that everything is working out swimmingly, or whether there really is, as I think the term I've used before, whether Tommy Franks really has some sort of trick up his sleeve, and there's some aspect to this operation that has not been talked about at all that is having a significant impact. The one thing I would draw your attention to, Lester, which caught a lot of us by surprise, is General Abizaid, who did a briefing, I think it was 8 or 9 days ago, said in the briefing that special operations units were working in and around Baghdad. And he said it as almost sort of a matter of fact, and at a time when it hadn't really been reported that special ops, there had been suspicions that special ops were in Baghdad. And then from that point on, we were given indications that some of the explosions that you would hear in Baghdad would not necessarily be the result of airstrikes, especially, for example, when there were no air raid sirens, no anti-aircraft fire. And so that was sort of a really interesting nugget, perhaps, but that's the sort of thing that I guess took a lot of us by surprise, that they would be so sort of matter of fact about that 8 or 9 days ago when the war was just beginning. So certainly there are things we don't know about. Certainly we're looking at this through a literally very sort of narrow focus, and it's a very controlling media operation that they have here. They understand that their job is to try to feed us whatever nuggets they can to sort of keep feeding the 24-hour news cycle so that we all have things to talk about. But certainly there are things that they don't want us to talk about, and to that end, I would say they've been probably pretty successful about keeping us busy in the sort of busyness that we are of 24-hour cable news, and yet keeping our attention away from things that frankly they don't want to have us know anything about.
Was that now? We saw the guy come up to the podium. Was that? Did they give us a warning as to how long? Was that?
I am actually not sure. I'm going to actually, since I'm about 30 feet away from this briefing room, why don't I walk in? I'm going to put the phone down just for a sec, walk in and ask if that was
okay. You do that. I'm just going to tell folks who are with us right now. You saw the time. It's early morning in Doha, Qatar. You're looking at the briefing room. What's going on? We're frankly not sure. We were told a bit over an hour ago that the Brigadier General Vincent Brooks, would be reading a short statement in the briefing room. It was very cryptic. In fact, they didn't even want that announced, that there would be an announcement for some time. That was lifted, and what we can tell you now is that CENTCOM is expected to share some good news about an operational mission. Beyond that, we don't have a clue. It is intriguing, though, that the general would be making a statement to the press in the wee hours of the morning. You see a lot of empty chairs there. A lot of the reporters who don't work for 24-hour operations as this, frankly, aren't there in the middle of the night. And there's some British military personnel you see that David described are also waiting to find out what this is all about, that it has not necessarily become common knowledge of all the members of the military there. So we all kind of wait expectantly. There was a separate, rather major development we've also been covering over the better part of an hour, which we're told is not related to this announcement. That is the fact that there is apparently heavy fighting going on right now between U.S. forces and the Iraqi Republican Guard near the southern town of Karbala. It is, as we've been reporting, a key city on the way to Baghdad, depending on what map you look at, 50 to 60 miles southwest of Baghdad. And somewhere along that line, if you were to draw a line from Karbala to the right, south there, is roughly where many of these dug-in Republican Guard divisions are. We don't know if the Republican Guard engaged this fight, if the U.S. forces have moved ahead, although amid those reports that there was an operational pause. In fact, we learned in the last several days that U.S. forces have been very much on the move in that area. Jack Jacobs is a retired Army colonel. He's also an MSNBC military analyst and a Medal of Honor recipient, and he is here. We appreciate his being here to help us walk through these developments. Is it... And, I don't like playing the speculation game, but when you hear major fighting near Karbala, is it just a matter of time before a big push into Baghdad? And could this be one of the signs of a big push brewing?
I think so. If we're able to reduce the strength of that unit with which we're engaged, it'll open up the entire western flank and western approaches to Baghdad. So this is it may be an engagement that was initiated by the Iraqis. It may be an engagement initiated by us, but in any case, we're going to want to engage these forces in any case at some time to eliminate them, because they're an impediment to moving towards Baghdad and to controlling the avenue of approach into Baghdad from the southwest. Very important approach into Baghdad in the direction that the 3rd Infantry Division is moving.
All right, and I'm just being told it could be a few more minutes. We're still waiting for that CENTCOM announcement to come from that podium at Doha. And again, Colonel Jacobs is here, and we're waiting for that and watching this battle that we frankly don't have a real big picture other than the initial report. It was big and it was escalating. Is there, frankly, Jack, a limit to how much damage you can do from the air on armored unit, on tank units?
No, well, yes and no. As long as you can see vehicles, you can hit them. And as long as you can hit them, you can destroy them. The limit is at a point when they've abandoned their vehicles and the troops on the ground are going into dug-in positions which are a bit more difficult to see. Of course, that puts them at a disadvantage without vehicles now. They don't have large weapons systems to use against us, and they're just effectively fighting as infantry. And if you're tank soldiers, by and large, you can be effective as soldiers, but you're not nearly as effective as infantrymen, as people who are trained as infantrymen. So we may have knocked out the large majority of their vehicles. They're inoperable now. They've gotten off their vehicles and they're fighting as infantrymen. In that case, then they become extremely vulnerable to things like artillery fire, of which we've got a great deal.
Did the U.S. even engage a Republican Guard during the Gulf War, or were those contacts with the regular Iraqi army?
I think they were with the regular Iraqi army, and one of the reasons we've got the Republican Guard units now is because, by and large, we didn't contact them and they escaped back towards Baghdad, and then we gave up and came home because we had accomplished our mission in securing Kuwait. I think there were several engagements with Republican Guard divisions, but units, but we did not do any kind of major damage to them of the type that we're doing now.
There was a decision not to try and destroy the Republican Guard, and right now there appears to be a decision to do just that.
Oh, no, absolutely. And we're after doing that because, like I said, they're a roadblock. They're an impediment to getting to Baghdad. One other thing crossed my mind. You remember a couple of days ago there was a report that a substantial-sized Iraqi unit was coming down from the neighborhood of Tikrit, which is Saddam Hussein's adopted home, and we're heading in the direction of the southern part of Baghdad in order, ostensibly, to reinforce these units we've been pounding day and night. Now, it would be a real rush for them to get from where they were all the way down here. And secondly, they'd have to be doing some of their movement during the daytime, in which case it would be relatively easy to pick off large formations of these units. But it's possible that some of them have come down here. The forward elements, perhaps, have made it all the way down to this region after running very, very quickly from up in Tikrit, and are reinforcing these units and have given them the wherewithal, perhaps, to make an attack on our unit, or on our 3rd Infantry Division, or we've encountered them in a meeting engagement. And in my experience on the ground, there's nothing more violent than a meeting engagement between two forces who engage each other by surprise, and then there's all the weapon systems you have are fired at each other.
Lieutenant General Michael Short was on earlier, and I was watching. He made an interesting point that we talk about the elite Republican Guard, that term is relative, elite by Iraqi standards. What do we know about the training and the preparedness and how the Republican Guard stacks up against something like the 3rd Infantry Division?
The Republican Guard units are good, but they're only adequate. And in fact, the Republican Guard units we are engaging now south of Baghdad are not as good as the Special Republican Guards who are ensconced in Baghdad. So these units are okay by American standards.
Now when you say Special Republican Guard, these are the elements that are allowed to be in Baghdad, as I understand it. The Republican Guard can't go into Baghdad. Are they equipped with tanks and heavy armor, or are these street fighters?
A little bit of both. They do have tanks. They do have armored personnel carriers, and they also have the best equipment in the Army. They are trained also, and they have been training for a long, long time now, in defending in urban terrain. So theoretically, they're going to be a formidable foe. But these guys outside of Baghdad, they're good, but they're not that good. And their equipment has not been maintained properly, and so they're not going to have if they have the use of the equipment now, tanks, armored personnel carriers, heavy weapons, they won't for very much longer, because their level of maintenance is absolutely awful. And we've already discovered, and we've known for quite some time, that trying to operate in this region, dust storms all the time. I mean, I came back recently from Qatar, and there was a dust storm in the morning and a dust dust storm in the afternoon, regular as clockwork, and it's absolutely blinding. As you've seen, it gets into every crevice of every bit of equipment. If you don't maintain it, if you can't maintain it, that equipment's going to go down very, very quickly, and I believe that's what we're probably seeing with the Republican Guards. Anything that's not been knocked out by air power probably is inoperable in any case because of the poor.
We need to go right now, and Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld right now and Senator Warner are at a microphone. Let's listen.
Forces to date, but also the question of the pending legislation regarding the supplemental. And we took a look into the future as to how a great deal of planning has taken place in the Department of Defense with regard to the post-combat situation. And the Secretary indicated that shortly we could be having a hearing on that subject and bring it into the open. So, Mr. Secretary, you want to add a few words, General?
Mr. Rumsfeld, we understand there may be some announcement coming out of Doho. Could you tell us what we might expect?
I could, but I think I'll let them handle it.
Can you tell us, does it involve a ground offensive, or does it involve a release of some personnel?
I'm going to let them handle it.
The good news?
Yes.
We don't get much news over here, sir. Please help us out. The Pentagon guys get all the good stuff.
Come on.
That's right, they do.
No, I'm going to leave that for CENTCOM, the Central Command, to handle.
So we'd love you to be able to put it into context, what it is from the Secretary of Defense. Could you?
I'm going to leave it to the Central Command to.
Context will be real obvious.
Yes.
Is this shock and awe then? Is that what we're going to say?
No.
Any word on the POWs?
Anything involving people, of course, to separate the two is always complicated because people have to be notified in time, and so there's always a lag. But I wouldn't, if it were POWs, I wouldn't get into it here.
Mr. Secretary, you're all concerned that the mounting civilian casualties among Iraqis undermines the U.S. opportunity to rebuild Iraq, gain Iraqi population's confidence.
I tell you what concerns me is the fact that the Iraqi regime has killed more innocent men, women, and children in Iraq in the last 12 days than collateral damage from any coalition country. And they are doing it systematically. They are executing people. They're putting guns to people's head. They shot a woman in the back, crossing a bridge. They're using human shields. And that concerns me. There has never been as precise a bombing campaign and as short a bombing campaign thus far in recent memory. If you ever think about it, the Gulf War was something like 38 days. Kosovo was 78 days of air bombardment. We've been at it now since a week ago Friday. And the number of precision weapons compared to the dumb bombs has reversed from like 1 in 10 to 10 to 1. And in fact, it is the concern ought to be for the viciousness of the regime of Saddam Hussein and the number of people they kill every single day with these execution death squads that they have roving the country, trying to repress the people.
Mr. Secretary, you got a lot of questions today from the media about the success or failure of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, could you tell us, did you get any questions about that today from the members of Congress?
Well, first, let's
their reaction?
We covered that very carefully. The General gave us a complete briefing. And I think, Duncan, I believe you'll join with me. The consensus in our group just now is that a good plan has been in place. It is being executed. It is timely. Considerable progress has been made to date. And we see no reason at this time for anyone to be in criticism of this program. And I want to talk a little bit about this retired military. I've been associated with the military a half century or more. I think some of them have, in a very constructive way, interpreted the complexity of military operations today and the equipment, and I think they have done a good job in portraying the courage shown by the men and women who are executing this plan. And if some have criticism, we don't mean to stifle freedom of speech, but I think they should follow the tradition of presidents, the commander-in-chiefs. You do not see former presidents criticizing a sitting president during a war. And in the same way, if they've got constructive criticism at variance with the plan, I think they should confidentially contact their own peers in the Pentagon and share it that way rather than open.
Senator Warner, what about current commanders who quoted this morning, Army colonels, about their concern about doing this war on the chief, not bringing up, power?
Well, there's always, during any conflict, going back to George Washington, complaints among his forces. I have personally been involved in the wars in Korea, and Vietnam, and Panama, and Somalia, and I could go on for a few more, and I think, Duncan, you've been in them. But that's all right. We'll take that in stride. I'm more concerned about the very senior officers who, by virtue of their training and experience, have a lot of credibility. And I think that if they have criticism, fine. Call up the chairman. You take the call?
Absolutely.
Good.
Let me add one thing, too, in terms of an advantage that I think that the Secretary and the military plan afforded us. We moved the tip of this spear very quickly. And some folks said we should have waited until we had more armor and we should have stuffed those roads, those narrow arteries, with lots of armor and lots of people. Because we moved quickly, we got over a lot of main bridges before they were blown. If we had waited, there's a good chance that those bridges would have blown. And the small number of casualties that we took, moving that several hundred miles, would have ballooned as we had people trying to build bridges while under enemy fire. So the Blitzkrieg armored operation that moved so quickly moved to our advantage and saved lots of lives.
And I might add the oil wells. The oil wells in the south are largely secure. In sharp contrast to 91, when we went over there, they were burning everywhere. The refugees, you do not see a tremendous flow of refugees. Again, the plan is working.
Mr. Secretary, are there any plans to activate more reservists?
Not that I've heard. The Central Command made a series of requests. They were all approved, and they were approved weeks ago. And the force flow for this campaign has been in train for many, many weeks now. I'm sure there'll be odds and ends and things that need to be done, additional small numbers, but I have not heard any, I've not seen or heard any requests for any large numbers of people.
By the way,
Secretary, I'm sorry.
By the way, our reservists are performing superbly.
And guardsmen, too. And guardsmen, too.
Just been superb.
During one of your briefings during the past week, you admonished some countries, namely Syria, not to send in supplies, night vision goggles. Did they listen to your words? Has this outside supply problem been taken care of, or is it still a problem?
I guess time will tell. Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr.
folks.
Secretary, can I ask you a question about the supplemental really quickly? There, you met with some of the appropriators. You're not going to get the kind of flexibility that you asked for in the supplemental. I think that.
Well, it's not final yet. They've still got to have both the House and the Senate and the conference and so forth. So
But as they're marked up now, Mr. Secretary, can you tell us, I mean, what would, cutting down the amount that you want in a flexibility fund do?
The President sent up a supplemental asking, the President sent up a supplemental requesting a degree of flexibility because it's important that it be there. And the reason it's important is because, for example, to the extent it counts...
Defense Secretary Rumsfeld on Capitol Hill suggesting the announcement from CENTCOM will be good news. And we can tell you that Associated Press is now reporting the United States has rescued an American prisoner of war, and they're citing a U.S. official. No indication who, and clearly there are families right now who hang on to that every word. Again, the U.S. has rescued an American prisoner, according to AP, and they're citing a U.S. official. The United States, trying to find the numbers right now, there have been 7 POWs listed up until now, 16 missing in action, and we have no indication of the prisoner or the missing person involved here. Only that one Associated Press bulletin coming across. All this has been, we've been watching this play out for the better part of an hour. The indication there would be a brief statement from Central Command headquarters in Doha, Qatar. It's been delayed. We just heard Secretary Rumsfeld confirm that, yes, there is something. He wants them to say it. He would only confirm good news. And now Associated Press reporting the United States has rescued an American prisoner of war. Good news for the home front, clearly good news for American morale. As we've reported, there have been 7 POWs. 2 we knew were on an Apache helicopter. NBC News, we can tell you that NBC News has now confirmed that there has been the apparent rescue of an American prisoner of war. And I'm getting the information as you're getting it, and I'll bring you what I get as I get it. We know there have been the 2 Apache pilots who were captured. There were also members of the 507th Maintenance Company who were ambushed, who were taken prisoner of war. And in addition, there are 16 missing in action, some from that 507th Maintenance Company and others. It's a bit of good news in a story that has a lot of bad news. The word that an American prisoner of war has apparently been rescued from Iraqi custody. And we're looking for more information here. And apparently we're told the delay right now in the official announcement is that CENTCOM right now is trying to make the family notification. General Barry McCaffrey, I'm told, is with us. General McCaffrey, you there?
Indeed, Lester.
It is clearly good news, the rescue of even a single U.S. POW. Your reaction?
Well, it certainly is good news. I mean, you know, every unit really mourns when they lose anybody missing in action, or particularly a POW. The story ought to be exciting. This, I assume, was special operations. Thousands of them around Iraq. This will be another tale of professionalism encouraged by special ops.
We know that, and we know that there's every effort to rescue downed air crew. Tell us what goes on, though, after they're taken prisoner of war. Is that an effort that always continues?
Oh, yeah. I think the intelligence community immediately tries to track what's going on to get international organizations like the Red Cross in to see them, to safeguard their, you know, human rights. But at the end of the day, what we want to make sure is at the end of the war, we get them all back sound in body and spirit. So to rescue one in a combat environment like this is really spectacular. And
we should note that the Pentagon right now is making family notifications, so we won't stray beyond just the word that at least one POW has been rescued. I understand we also have Representative Kurt Weldon with us of Pennsylvania, a member of the Armed Services Committee. Representative Weldon, anything you can add to this? Have you heard this report?
Well, I'd rather have that come from CENTCOM, but it's good news, and we're all excited about this development, and it's a continuing, I think, example of how well our military does its job. There's a lot of sniping and carping out there, but I can tell you, we have total confidence in the Congress that our generals, our leaders, and the Secretary of Defense are doing a fantastic job. And we ought to give them time to work through this plan. We in the Congress will give them total and complete support. And let me say this, I've been here 17 years. I have never seen a Secretary of Defense and military leaders who have done as much to reach out to every member of the House and Senate to give them on a daily basis updated information, to ask any questions they want, to challenge, so members of Congress have more information available to them in this conflict than we've had in the 17 years I've been here.
Chris Matthews also with us, who you'd normally be seeing this time of night, and we are, of course, covering this breaking development that apparently an American POW has been rescued from Iraqi forces. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, it'll detract a bit from the back and forth between the generals and the civilians in the Defense Department for a couple of minutes. We were watching just before this announcement, John Warner, the senator from Virginia, taking a shot at previous generals, ex-generals, but the real fight has been between the generals in the field and, of course, the civilian authorities at the Defense Department. I guess this is going to give us a positive relief from that sort of a Pentagon buzz, which has been kind of disturbing to most people, to hear that the top people can't seem to agree on war policy, while our fighting people, our fighting men and women, are out there exposed in harm's way, and the big shots are having a hard time getting their act together. I think this
were also called successful today by the Defense Department. The Ansar al-Islam camp was hit by more than a dozen cruise missiles and precision-guided bombs. Then, and you're taking a look at the pre- and post-strike images here, the U.S. Special Forces went along with Kurdish troops and raided what was left of that compound. Special Forces teams recovering potentially valuable evidence.
We have found various documents, equipment, etc., that would indicate a presence of chemical and/or biological weapons. Most of the samples that have been taken are being flown back to the States for further study.
Now, Pentagon officials say coalition airstrikes have been having a punishing effect on Iraqi Republican Guard units. Tanks dug in and ready to fight approaching coalition forces, taken out one by one from above. Iraqi fuel trucks are popular targets as well, disrupting Republican Guard resupply efforts. Pentagon officials say there is significant movement of these divisions, these Republican Guard divisions, trying, they say, to fill in for the divisions now devastated by these air attacks. Now, further south today, a Cobra helicopter helicopter attack struck a building where irregular Iraqi forces were said to be meeting near the southern city of Basra. The second largest city down there is not in coalition hands yet, but Central Command officials say the coalition is steadily removing Iraqi forces that have been holding residents down. And meantime, special operations missions continue around the country. This is some video of a Rangers raid on an Iraqi commando unit out west. These are continuing around the clock. More of the push as the major battles against the Iraqi Republican Guard divisions continue. And today, the usually quiet chairman of the Joint Chiefs passionately expressed support for this battle plan.
Are we going to adjust? You bet. Are we light on our feet? Can we adjust? Yes. Can they adjust? They try, but it's futile. Okay, this is a great plan, and it's one I've signed up to. It's one all the Joint Chiefs signed up to, and it's one we're going to see through to completion.
And again, the breaking news, a prisoner of war has been rescued by coalition forces. We will hear, of course, more from Central Command in Qatar. We will hear an update about the latest battles ongoing, the major offensive against Iraqi Republican Guard divisions starting tonight. Shep?
Brett Baer with 2 headlines for us tonight, and we'll take you to Central Command in just a moment.